Okay, welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. It's Monday, October 28th, 2013 at 2 p.m. May we please have roll call?
Commissioner Garpetian?
Here.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Madam Chair Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
And Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Thank you. All present.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Wednesday, October 23rd, 2013 on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Item 3 on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from September 23rd, 2013. Are there any comments or corrections to the minutes before we approve those?
I have none.
No? Oh, okay.
Okay.
Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Okay. Commissioner Garpetian?
Yes.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
And Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Madam Chair Shire? Unanimously approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is oral communications. This discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes, and the commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. And I don't believe I have any speaker cards that are not related to agenda items. So we'll move on to number 5, comments from commissioners.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd just like to say that I attended the October 12th event sponsored by the Associates of Brand Library and Art Center to raise money for the restoration and framing of the ceiling fragments, historic ceiling fragments that were salvaged from the Brand Library. And I just wanted to say that it was a very successful event, and the group raised the funds necessary to do the restoration and the framing. And so those, if they're not framed, they will at least be available at the end of March when the library opens for public display. And I'd like to publicly thank Jean and Edgardo Simone, the hosts of the event, who just did an extraordinary job, and all of the people who volunteered at the event, and of course all of the people who, fortunately, whose names are many, fortunately, who bought tickets to the event and supported it. So thank you very much, and the ceiling restoration and framing will go forward.
And where was the event held?
At the home of Jean and Edgardo Simone.
A beautiful Glendale Register property.
Glendale Register property for our house. And we thank them very much. And also filled with art wall to wall. So we thank them very much.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. I'm glad to hear we'll be able to see those preserved. I also just wanted to commend the Glendale Historical Society for another very successful annual home tour in the Casa Verdugo district of the city. I think this was probably a unique opportunity because of the history of that part of the city and the fact that they were able to put together a walking tour in a neighborhood that has a very cohesive and important development history in the city. So anyways, I always look forward to the Historical Society home tours, and I congratulate them for another great event.
I'd like to second that. Having worked at the tour and participated in going around to the houses, it just seems like the Historical Society's tours get better and better year after year, and they are just so extraordinary at doing this, and I just wanted to commend the leadership of the society and the members and volunteers for doing such a wonderful job this year. It was a great, great tour.
Excellent. I agree. I attended, and it was, great to see the different styles of homes, and, all within a couple blocks of each other. Great job. Are there any other comments?
Yeah, I have a little comment I'd like to read.
Go ahead.
Yesterday in the news press, there was an article by Ron Kay, and it just brought back some little memories, and I would just like to read a little bit about it. I would like to publicly say goodbye to an old friend. I first met my friend in 1956 when my mother, having let me play in the ankle pool that was then at Verdugo Park, walked over to the big, impressive, and almost new baseball stadium recently renamed Casey Stengel Field. The stadium and I were almost the same age, as it appeared in 1949 and I in 1951. As I got older, I would share many a summer day there. It always seemed when in the stadium, the grass was always bright green, the sky so blue, and the sun so warm. My friends and I would spend hours in the hill behind the bleachers, shagging foul balls and returning them for a coupon for a free root beer. If we had more time, we would walk out to the scoreboard in left field, which was manually operated. We would score the game by lifting the big metal numbers and putting them in their slots at the end of the inning. We truly were the boys of summer. To me, the stadium always made me so proud of Glendale, and it seemed in my limited worldview only Glendale could have had such a wonderful ballpark. I saw many games there. My older brother played in left field and graduations also. Unfortunately, all things have an end. Now the Glendale City Council has approved an expenditure of $450,000 to demolish the stadium and put up temporary bleachers. The news press relates the next chapter in this historic place is a new $8 million stadium that will preserve the history and importance of that facility, and hopefully mine too. When the time comes, I encourage all Glendale to help in the creation of that new stadium that will be built. And we'll have boys and girls again saying, only in Glendale could we have such a great ballpark. As for me, I would like to take one last look and say one more goodbye to a great stadium filled with warm summer memories.
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
And the council also talked about recognizing the need to keep the name at the site, so that's important.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll move to the next item. Number 6, old business. Do we have any?
We have no old business today. Everything's
Okay.
new.
Then we'll move right on to number 7, new business. 7A, 1458 Royal Boulevard. This is a Glendale Register nomination and a Mills Act application.
And Eileen Babachani will be presenting for this project, or this property.
Good afternoon, members of the Commission. So the item 7A is the designation, application for designation of 1458 Royal Boulevard. The building is located in the Royal Boulevard Historic District. And 1458 Royal Boulevard is a two-story single-family residence built in 1929. And designed in the Spanish colonial revival style. No architect is known to be associated with the property, but Harry Marcus, a successful local contractor and builder, built this property. And the applicants suggest that the property's association with the original builder, Harry Marcus, and a later resident, Kepler Robinson, who was owned the house in 1957 to 1958, made it significant under criteria 2. But being successful in a business or being active in a local organization does not necessarily make a person important in the level of being significant for consideration under criteria 2. So for the architectural feature of the house, the walls of the house are stucco clad and the roof is low-pitched, hip roofed, and also a shed roof, clad with red clay tiles. And the roof line also features shallow eaves with decorative rafter tails. The main body of the house is a rectangular volume with a one-story projection at the front facade, which is located at the center of the front facade. There is a porte-cochere at the west side of the property, facing the Royal Boulevard. There is an entry courtyard at the west side of the one-story projection here, which features a courtyard wall, which is original, and decorative fountain, tiled fountain, and terracotta pavers, which both of them are not original. According to this historic picture, this wall originally was built to the west side of the property, at the end of the line at the west side, and it had an opening facing Royal Boulevard, which was a driveway. And it is not known when this part of the wall removed. So it's supposed to be here at this age. The front facade largely reflects its original appearance, and other features at the front facade is a deeply recessed entry door, rectangular leaded glass window above the main door, and the wrought iron balcony with a French door, and the stucco chimney above the one-story projection from in the front facade. Windows throughout the house consist of recessed multi-light wood casement windows, French door, and mostly appear to be original. Many window opening feature wrought iron grills, while some of them appear to be original, but many of them are added over the years. This is why we have different type and design of ironworks in the house, which is reduce the level of historic integrity for the house. The side and the rear facade are simpler comparing to the front facade, but several alterations have changed the appearance of the rear portion of the property. And second story addition over the original single story detached garage was built in 1976, and this addition connects to the second floor of the main house and made a new breezeway here. Also, there is another alteration and addition which was made to the second floor of the original rear facade, and here, which is this addition is projected from the main line of the property and are supported with heavy wood beams and posts.
The owners clarified something in the staff report that addition may be earlier than we thought it was. The staff report says 1999, and they say that it was in 69, and we have no reason not to believe that, but we can check that also. So.
And this alteration in overall affect the level of historic and architectural integrity, and especially the 1976 addition to the garage completely changed the scale and massing of the back for this house. So those are some other shots from backyard and additions, new stairs, and also landscape feature. At the end, staff concludes that 1450A Royal Boulevard does not appear to meet any of the eligibility criteria for listing on the Glendale Register of Historic Resources. Staff believes that 1458 Royal Boulevard is a good example of the Spanish colonial revival style house, and that's why it is a contributor structure to the historic district. In addition of the alteration, which significantly detract its original character, the property does not represent distinctive characteristic of its style. So staff believes that it's not qualified for designation under criteria 3. That's it.
Okay. We have a couple speaker cards, so we'll open the public hearing. First, Tim Gregory.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Gregory, and I'm also known as the building biographer, and I think you probably have in your packets a copy of the history I did for the owners, and I also assisted Mr. and Mrs. Russin in the preparation of the applications. I wanted to emphasize a few of the architectural details of the house, which I think were kind of glossed over a little bit. There was a very fine leaded stained glass window with rondelle panes on the front facade that projects a soft light into the interior of the house. I haven't run across one that is quite so subtle. These types of windows often have kind of glary kind of bottle glass, whereas this is a very pastel stained glass, and as I say, creates a very warm feeling inside the house. The two major chimneys are unusually whimsical, in my opinion, with their pyramid-shaped roofs with spherical finials at the top. There's hardly enough room for the smoke to get out because they're so squat. The same paver-like bricks are used in the chimneys as you find on the coping of the walls of the courtyard. So I think the courtyard coping is original. There's an unusual amount of wrought iron decoration in this house, including window grills, light fixtures, and balconies. There's some concern about when the window grills were installed. One significant thing is I found no building permits in the record for the installation of security bars or grills. Although some of the grills at the rear and the driveway side of the house may be later additions, I feel the great majority of the grills on the front facade are original. They appear to be much too delicate and finely wrought to provide much in the way of security. I believe it was in the 1970s that everyone got worried about crime and started putting security bars on the windows. But I think, as I mentioned, these seem to be of a much earlier vintage than that. As you may have noticed, all the grillwork shows an unusual variety of design. Each grill seems to be a bit different than the others. This use of wrought iron and the prominent entry courtyard are trademarks of the Mallorcan substyle, which is not as prevalent in Southern California as the more common Andalusian substyle. There's a more subtle characteristic of the house that struck me the longer I looked at it. There was something about the house that made me think this is a bit different than the other Spanish colonials in the neighborhood. It was designed to look old and weathered. It has a rusticity about it that contrasts with the other Spanish colonials on the street. And although they are very attractive and sometimes are kind of an architectural fancy, often they look like they've just come out of the box, whereas this house has always had that, I think, distinction of looking old in place. It doesn't mean the house in question needs maintenance or a paint job. It just reflects the designer and builder's wish for what I call authenticity. I know Mr. and Mrs. Russin are prepared to provide you more information, so I'll let them do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one question. You were talking about the bricks on the chimney are the same as the ones in the courtyard, the courtyard?
Same dimensions and the same type of...
So you think the bricks in the courtyard are original to the...
Well, it made me believe so because they seem to be identical, if not very much the same.
Yeah.
Oh, the pavers on the top, the coping.
The copings might
Oh, okay.
be on the wall. Yeah, so we think the brick copings on the courtyard wall appear to be original.
Okay.
At first, we questioned whether the wall was original because of its placement and a little bit about its style, but then we zoomed in on the photo and saw that it was clearly there in the same shape, and that just the western section that Eileen had mentioned was taken down.
Okay.
I have a question, too, on the stained glass window in the front. Do you venture an estimate of age or know the origin of the glass at all? Because we talked about it a little bit at the house, and what is your feeling about that glass?
No, only that it seems unique to me as far as other houses I've seen, that kind of glass. I'm only aware of one studio that did that kind of thing, was Judson Studios, although I'm sure there are others that did. But they're that very light pastel coloring, which is almost, you have to kind of stare at it to see what color it is.
And we have no reason to think it's anything but original. It seems likely.
Any other questions for Tim Gregory? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next speaker, Joe and Stephanie Russin.
I'm Joe Russin. This is Stephanie. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to visit us yesterday. It's, I'm sure, an imposition to take your Sunday afternoon to go around and look at things, but we appreciate the time you spent with us. Oh, you've heard the staff say that the house is a good example of the Spanish colonial style, and I hope you can indulge us a little bit because we're arguing against staff. But I think that while those words are welcome to us, they understate the case. The survey for the Royal Boulevard Historic District notes that the developers promised, quote, a beautiful Spanish village, which is to be part of Rossmoyne. Every home within the Spanish village is to be of pure Spanish type. The entire arrangement will be reminiscent of old Spain. Well, 1458 Royal was one of the earliest houses to make good on that promise. In fact, it was the fifth or sixth house built on Royal Boulevard. And it remained one of the relatively few houses on the boulevard until the late 30s and the 40s when building picked up after the Depression. But we learned about all that after we bought the house. We were at first just charmed with Royal Boulevard itself, with the warm embrace that the house offered of age, character, and thick walls. And although it's not entirely part of the designation, the inside of the house was very Spanish feeling. We had Spanish furniture, and so it felt at home when we came into the house right away, and we wanted to maintain that look in everything that we've done, including keeping the old gravity heaters, which are from 1929. The idea that the house should be registered came to us after we heard the discussions about the historic district, and later from what we learned from the Glendale Historical Society when they included the house on one of their tours. And it is clear from their notes that the house has all the classic features of this style, and Stephanie will talk about that for a minute.
So Stephanie, if you want to, or Joe, if you could take this and then just hit the arrow button to advance your slides. Over on the right, bottom right corner. Nope, the black button, yeah, the right arrow or the down arrow.
Again, I will thank all of you as well for indulging us. And we're not experts, so some of the remarks that I have and the things I wanted to point out are really according to several people who are much more knowledgeable about us regarding presentation and the architecture involved. Specifically, they said the house, they informed us, and they strongly felt this way, that the house is more than an excellent example of Spanish colonial revival architecture. And they noted that there are some Mediterranean revival influences, such as the shaped rafter tails at the eaves. It is also a unique representation of the style, and thus, and I quote from your own criteria, embodies the distinctive and exemplary characteristics of an architectural style. It takes the classic character-defining features of the Spanish colonial revival architecture, which you acknowledged in your report: two-story configuration, the symmetrical massing with projected planes defined by corbelline, multiple roof lines, red clay tile, medium and low-pitched hip roof, smooth stucco wall cladding, wood casement windows, arched openings, wrought iron grills, balconette. It also has the front courtyard, which was mentioned. And we would point out these are applied in a manner that is rather unique. Specifically, to the right, you can see the simple two-story rectangular volume with the one-story den wing projecting from its middle. This was deemed to be atypical. Here's the chimney that Tim was referring to on top of the projection, which I just mentioned, which we believe is quite distinctive, and I would mention, tops the corner beehive fireplace inside the den, though I realize there's not a lot you can give us points for in terms of interior. This is the the other thing that was pointed out, which this does not exemplify, is the proportions of the window openings to solid wall it was felt is exceptionally well done. In regards to the front courtyard, which I don't right now have a picture of in front of you, none of the other Spanish colonial revivals on Royal have a front courtyard, and that this is deemed a relatively rare feature of this style of architecture that our house does have. What you see here is the 19-panel rustic front door, also noted as noteworthy, and we have no doubt, we have no reason to doubt that it is original. This is the picture of the stained glass window that Tim was mentioning above the entryway, and it is the same design, as he mentioned, as those created by Judson Studio around the time our house was built, though we have not been able to confirm it was produced by this studio. But it really is very similar to a house that was on one of the tours a few years ago that had confirmed that almost an identical but larger version of our window was done by Judson. The overall effect of the way the house is with these features is very subtle and refined and not typical of most Spanish colonial revival houses in the city. And we believe that all this argues that 1458 does indeed satisfy criteria 3, distinctive style and architectural significance.
I'd like to go a little bit to the staff report. It suggests the house might qualify, or at least as I read it, except for some alterations which the staff is unhappy about. But we're not designating a museum which was frozen in time. It's a living house, and the question is, are the alterations acceptable and are they consistent with the original structure, and do they maintain its integrity? Staff has concern about the grill work. In fact, most of the elegant grill work, as Mr. Platt has agreed, is probably original, and that which is not original is inconsistent with it. But if the grill work is a problem, and particularly, as some of you noted when you were at the house yesterday, the extension of the balconette with a simple cage, which was for safety, if that's objectionable, that's easily fixed, and we would be happy to work with staff to correct the grill problem if we probably would do it anyway, but we certainly would do it as part of the designation. But we wonder, why is there such concern about the grill work? These kind of houses, when you look around, all of them have a variety of grill work. Every time you go to a iron master, he sort of copies it, and then they add a little bit of their own individual touch. And I think that's typical of a lot of the houses in the area. The staff report is critical of some of the alterations that added to the mass of the house. There's no denying that the home was enlarged and improved, but the work was done, some of it a half century ago and some of it 37 years ago. And as Jay has noted, the date on the little extension of the upper bedroom was 1969, not 1999. I'm not an architect, but it's obvious to my eye that great care was taken to have the alterations to be compatible with the original facade. The resulting structure is coherent, it's pleasing to the eye, it maintains the original integrity of the house, and it makes it more livable. Even the footprint of the original one-story detached garage was unchanged when they plopped the family room on top of it, and they replicated the roof, or made a roof that was consistent with the roof that was originally on top of the garage. There is concern expressed somewhere in the staff report that the house was once detached from the garage and it's now connected via a stairway and a breezeway. But other houses on the register have their garages connected where they once stood alone. So to sum up, our case here for you is we enjoy the house because of its ambience and history, and we've tried to maintain its character and the integrity of its design. Much of the grill work is of the period, or very close to the period. The old additions are compatible with the look and character of the original house. And even though many Spanish revivals are on the register, and I know that's a concern because Mr. Platt has made it very clear to us that's a concern, the inclusion of almost all the defining features of Spanish colonial revival in a unique way we think sets the house apart and satisfies criteria 3. And finally, since it was one of the first houses to define the whole neighborhood and to define that style of that lifestyle which the builders wanted to create and which drew so many people to Glendale in that period, we think it satisfies criteria 5 as something that is contributing to the historic nature of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Not at this time. I may have some questions for staff later.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll close the public session. I just wanted to make a comment before the commissioners have discussion.
Thank you.
We have a very difficult decision in front of us, and I wanted to make sure to the owners that you understand that it doesn't take anything away from your beautiful home, your contributing home, your historic home. And we have to really weigh the guidelines. And so as we have discussion today, just...
I understand. I forgot to mention in case you were concerned.
Excuse me a second. We'll have to open up the public session again.
Sorry.
Okay? You may speak.
In case commissioners were interested, we've blown up that 1936 picture a little bit, and if you were good at the kind of reading of photographs that was required to spot enemy mines and things in World War II, you can see the original grill work in the pictures from the shadows, and we have copies of that if you want to take a look at it.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, we'll close the
From
public hearing.
1936? Thank you.
Okay, so with that, are there comments from commissioners
I have a few questions, if I may.
to staff?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I wanted to understand if the alteration was not done to this house. I want to know which way we're going and why is that, so it will be clear for them as well, and it will be clear for me as well as the public. If the alteration was not done to this house, and the grill work, I think it could be worked out, would this be a house that we would approve to be designated as a historic resource, or it wouldn't be?
Well, we just recommend, but
Right.
no, it's a lovely house. No one's denying that, and it has a number of really nice features. I don't think it's completely unique, but in some ways it's two-story volume. It's a little less articulated than a lot of Spanish houses. So where Mr. Gregory, I'm not familiar with the Mallorcan sub-style, but it definitely could be seen as having a combination of Mediterranean and Spanish influences. As Mr. Russin said, we would never say a house is not eligible for designation because it's a Spanish colonial revival, but I think there's a subtext that the bar is set pretty high through the ongoing series of nominations. Yeah, and ultimately it's up to the commission to determine whether you feel that it meets the criteria, but it's kind of if it didn't have any additions and everything looked 100% original, it's a lovely house. We've designated other houses like that in the past, and we've designated houses that have additions, generally more modest and less kind of altering to the overall scale and mass of the place.
Because the ironwork, I think the grills in the front, I don't know, in my experience, I think the ones that are surface mounted, they were added later, but the ones in the front that is embedded into stucco, I think they were original. But whoever added these grills on, I think they tried to match the design, the existing design of the rest of the house. But the balcony, I think it could be done. But as far as the alterations that was done to the property, if that really hurts the nature of it, the what we're looking for, and that standard, that bar that it's so high, set so high at this time, that's what I was trying to get to. If this alteration was not done, would we go towards that route of making the recommendation or not?
It seems likely generally houses that have more historic integrity and fewer alterations come in with a head start when they're looking to be designated. We can't necessarily say that any house is a shoe-in. Well, maybe a few, but but many houses we'd have to kind of have some active comparison so that we could kind of have an idea what the precedent for designation's been in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments?
At this time.
Any other commissioners?
Well, I just have, I'm looking at the pros and cons, and because I grew up on this street, I'm a little conflicted on the whole thing. And I'm looking at the pros for me. It's one of the first homes that was built on Royal Boulevard, and would Royal Boulevard have been Royal Boulevard if this house hadn't been built? It's also one of the only homes I know of on Royal Boulevard that has a courtyard, and the mentioning of the stained glass and all of the grill work. So it's got a lot of pluses, but like Jay said, it's one of quite a few homes that are, Spanish revival, and it has to meet a certain criteria.
And then if I could just interject, Royal Boulevard was the second phase of the Rossmoyne development, so it's actually part of Rossmoyne. It's just an artifact of our designation process that it was designated before Rossmoyne and seems kind of separate, but it's really...
Well, if you grew up there, it seems separate. So.
Of course.
I would just like to hear what the other commissioners have to say, because I'm on there are things that I really like about it, and there are things that are I'm concerned about.
So, I think we're all struggling. For me, well, I'll start by saying that the home is a beautiful example of Spanish colonial revival style. It does have many of the characteristics that we would expect. It does have the beautiful courtyard. It has the deeply recessed window in the front with the stained glass. It has the deeply recessed door, the massing, the articulation of the front facade, the porte cochere. It's very nice. And it's obvious that the homeowners love and respect their home and want to protect it. That was very obvious when I went through yesterday. I'm not so uncomfortable with the grill work. I think that's something we could probably talk through if the commission felt that some of it was inappropriate or maybe later additions or related to security more than decorative elements. So I think that's workable. Eileen, could we go to the photo of the back of the house? I'm not even necessarily quite as bothered with the addition on the left side from 1969. But as the staff report points out, I think the second level addition to the garage, which is large and cantilevers over both sides of the garage, I think for me, the way it connects to the house, if I may, I think that might even be unusual by contemporary standards to have a detached garage connect to a house at the second level. But again, that's a little problematic for me. And the second level walkway is not, I think, is incompatible in my opinion. I don't think we would typically see a walkway that connects the upper level of the house all the way around to the second level of a detached garage, sort of almost taking up 3/4 of the walkway and doing that zigzag. I feel uncomfortable with the way it's articulated. I think we might see a large veranda on the back of a house connecting rooms, but again, I would, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I find that a little incongruous. And those are just my preliminary comments. I'd like to hear, what the rest of my colleagues have to say. And, clearly this was all done many years before the current owners purchased the home. So, as Chair Shire pointed out, does not reflect on your desire to preserve the home.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming forward with your nomination. No matter what happens, it's always great when people feel a strong stewardship of their historic home, and yours as part of the Royal Boulevard District obviously is an esteemed, because of its placement in time and being built, an esteemed member of the collective landmark that is the district. And it's a beautiful district. I won't repeat. I read the staff report. I felt that the staff report made some excellent points about what's noteworthy and distinctive about the house, and also what some of the problems are. And I agree with Commissioner Vartanyan's comments. And I think you made a very well thought out case for some of the features of the house that are maybe unusual. And there are a few there. The chimneys certainly are. That glass may or may not be. The old patina of the house is very charming. But I think for something to rise to the level of landmark, sometimes the whole is not the sum of its parts. And So you can have a number of features that you can count individually, but do they collectively evoke an architectural statement as a whole, working together to make the house rise to the level of criteria 3? And I struggle with this more than anything else, and when I'm not sitting here on the commission, I think about this issue more than anything else. And I will mention, at the risk of reenacting my fellow commissioner's ire, that I did actually vote no on his home, which is probably more intact than yours. And
His former home.
Former home.
yes.
Okay, so, yes, former home, the one that he feels very attached to, and also another home on the block, so 2 on Royal Boulevard, that I felt were beautiful, well-tended, and definitely a source of pride for the neighborhood, but we have to draw the line, and I can't see my way clear right now in my head to that this would rise to the level of landmark status. I'm not taking anything away from the house. I regret having voted yes on some things that I voted yes on in the past, and I took issue with some of the houses that were designated on past commissions, because I really feel like we have to have a strong criteria for exceptional architecture here, and I think there are many pieces of this house that do rise to that occasion, but as a whole, I see it as a beautiful contributing structure, and would probably, right now, I'm struggling to find my way into it unless somebody else on the commission compels me otherwise. So I'm giving you my thinking right now, and it ain't over till it's over. That's true. So there's my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'll offer my comments. To the homeowners, I just want to say, yeah, you have a beautiful home and a definitely stunning facade for Royal Boulevard, and I think it's great that it's been named as a contributor and that it's one of those first ones. Our job as a commission is really to not just look at its value on Royal Boulevard, but throughout the whole city. And does it rise to that exemplary level of architectural style across the city? And is it one of the best of this style and intact and preserved and or restored back to its original nature? And although modifications and alterations happen over time, are they truly intact with scale and massing and all of that? I think for me, the back of the house definitely presents a problem. The intersection and connection of the house to the garage is very awkward. It's not executed well architecturally. Now the finishes, may be there, and they did their best to kind of match in finish, but scale, massing, the volume, it definitely is clunky. And it really loses that very romantic feel to a Spanish colonial house of the asymmetry, but also you find symmetry in the asymmetry. And here I feel it's very awkward. The walkway that kind of, as the other commissioner mentioned, kind of traverses many different facades, then connecting the upper addition to the garage, and the garage kind of looks overpowered by the second-story addition. And so unfortunately for me, I would not be able to support it as a Glendale Register historic resource. However, with that said, it takes nothing away from your beautiful home. We just have a very tough job and tough position evaluating those across the entire city. And again, we appreciate you making your home open to Glendale Historic Society, because we're thrilled for owners like yourself who will preserve it and protect it and live in a historic district and appreciate it. But for me, that's what makes it really impossible to vote for it. It's not just the grillwork on the front or those subtleties. It's unfortunately something that happened well before your time. But with that said, it's a beautiful home, and I'm glad you're taking good care of it. You're perfect caretakers for it. Are there any other comments, or is there a motion?
Mike, did you?
No.
No anyone like to make
Whoever
a
makes the motion gets a special form,
paper?
or the return of a special form that helps motion making become easy. So don't hesitate.
Do you think we should discuss more, or do you want?
If anyone has comments or more discussion, we're welcome to. There's no motion on the table yet, so.
Well, I think what other thing that I was struggling with was the builder of the house. Although he was a well-known contractor, I think it was the only house that was built in this city, as the staff report indicated, and also the architect was not known as well to know who designed this house. And I think these are the items that we are struggling with. That's why I was asking the question, if the modification or alteration was not done to the house, would this be a contributing house? Would this be a house that it's good enough to be designated as a historic resource? And we are fortunate enough to have a large number of homes from the same era with the same design, with the same style, but I think we need to be very careful as to which one we pick and choose as to be designated as a historic resource. And it's a tough job. It's tough to turn houses like this down, because they were gracious enough to let me in their house, and they've done everything even to preserve the inside of the house for that era. And we were always like, although it's not in our purview to the inside of the house, but the inside was beautiful. Even they tried to match their furniture to that era as well. But unfortunately, I think the amount of alteration that was done is hurting the property.
And just to clarify, in terms of the builder, we don't know if this is his only property, but we made the statement that it's very hard to attribute significance to a property because of its association with the specific builder, unless a tremendous amount of research is done to show us why this work of that builder is different. Perhaps it was his own house, or for some other reason. And then most of our properties on the Glendale Register, we don't know the architects. So in Glendale, we can't hold that. We accept that reality because we just didn't have that information. So just for background.
So if it helps anymore, I think one of the tests we tend to use is, we ask ourselves if this home were already listed on the register, and if these alterations were proposed today, would we approve them? And I think I'm hearing that, most of us are struggling with some of the alterations at the back. That said, as a contributor to your district and within the district, you can have some comfort knowing that your home will be protected. And so I know none of us wants to make the motion, but if there's no further discussion, I will go ahead.
I think it's right.
Thank you, Lorna.
Okay, I move that the Historic Preservation Commission recommends that City Council not designate the property at 1458 Royal Boulevard as a historic resource, not add the property to the Glendale Register of Historic Resources, and not authorize the city manager to enter into a Mills Act contract for the property. The recommendation for not designating the property is based on the Commission's finding that the property does not meet any of the designation criteria established by the municipal code.
Is there a second?
Since I grew up on Royal Boulevard, I second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Sadly, yes.
Madam Chair Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
And Commissioner Garpetian?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion failed for recommendation.
Thank you again for bringing it for us for consideration.
And then I think just to remind the public and the Commission, this isn't necessarily the end. Owners always, or applicants always, are same, always have the ability to move forward to City Council with this, which most people choose not to do. But it is an option for people who believe passionately that we overlooked something. So that's always an option. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is 7B, 1605 Arbor Drive. This is also a Glendale Register nomination and Mills Act application. There are no speaker cards. I need a speaker card then if there isn't, but we'll go to staff report first. Yeah. Go ahead.
Item 7B is Glendale Register nomination and Mills Act contract for 1605 Arbor Drive. This building is located within the proposed Brockman Park Historic District, which is currently in the designation process. It is identified in the Historic Resource Survey as a contributing structure to the historic district. So the house was built in 1910 by John Brockman. The style of the house is combination of the craftsman and prayer styles. The designer and builder of the house are unknown. John Brockman, the builder of the house, was a wealthy Los Angeles businessman and mining magnate. He constructed the house as his own residence in 1910. He appears to be a significant figure in the history of Los Angeles and also Southwest, which would make the property eligible for designation under Criteria 2. And the house originally was part of Brockman Estate located in the Vertigo Mountain foothills, which was subdivided after Mr. Brockman's death in 1925. And the south part of this estate is current proposed Brockman Park, Historic District Park. Going back to his life story, John Brockman was born in Hessen, Germany in 1841. He moved to Illinois with his family in 1849. And after graduation from high school in Rock Island, and after working 2 years for his family farm, he started working as a steward at Rock Island House, a well-known hotel. And at that place, he could visit some famous men of those days. After having some other jobs, he joined Union Army during the Civil War. And after war, he went to New Mexico and he started prospecting for gold. And after that, we don't know what happened, but he started purchasing lands and investing on some department stores. Very soon, he owned gold and silver mine in Arizona, which at the time he was millionaire when he purchased those mine. So in 1896, he moved to Los Angeles with his family and became one of the city's largest property holders. This picture was taken of his family in front of his first home in Los Angeles, located at the 814 West 28th Street in Los Angeles. Some of other buildings that he owned in Los Angeles was a commercial building at 7th Street, which is still known as Brockman Building. And the other one was Singleton Court, an beautiful estate in the West Adams neighborhood built in 1894. The clock from this tower and a bronze statue of Mercury was brought by him to his new home in Glendale. So there were a few residents in 1910s in the area when Brockman built his residence. His home in Glendale became famous and was called Beautiful Country House. He purchased 70 acres vacant lot, a part of Casa Verdugo, Foothill County, and he made the house as his full-time residence in 1914, a year after his wife's death. The house, along with extensive electric illumination, gardens, a lake, and deer park, became a well-known feature of the area. It was described in Los Angeles Times as one of the show places of the state. And this is a 1914 photo of the house, and I will talk about the other feature such as the clock tower in a minute. After Brockman's death in 1925, the Roman Catholic Church occupied the house from 1925 to 1928. And then after that, the entire state was subdivided into a tract named Brockman Park in his honor. This is a postcard from 1920s picturing this beautiful house. For architectural description, 1605 Arbor Drive is located on a hillside above the Cumberland Road and is accessed through a driveway from Arbor Drive. Some part of the building, the property is visible from the Cumberland Road, which are a clock tower and the upper portion of the second floor from the front facade. The plan of this house is rectangular and feature side gable roof with extremely deep eaves clad with red clay tile. There are two side porches at the corner of the front porch, which originally were porte-cochered. And the rear portion of the house is built up to the hillside, and two flat portion at the north or rear side of the house might be early additions. According to this historic picture from 1914, you can see a small portion of this projection in this side. So we think that maybe this is an early addition to the house. And there is a small landscape area at the west side of the house and a gateway over there, which the style of that is similar to the style of the house. This gateway also is addition, which is added in 1914 to the house, and the pound patio and bridge in this area, which were added in 1999. And the four-story clock tower, and I'm gonna talk about that later. Old picture of the house. This is the east facade. Another old picture, you can see the bronze statue of Mercury in the front of the east facade, and you can see the porte-cochere, which is now a side porch attached to the front facade. The walls for this house are clad with a small stucco, and at the east side there is a two-story projection, and the other feature are the windows, which are consist of light divided light wood casement window, double hung window with multi-pane above single pane sash, and some fixed windows. Mostly appear to be original for this house. Some other notable feature for this house are dome treads, rise from the mostly corner part of the roof, and sloping bollards at the end of the side porch, and battered walls at the base, and also decorative attic vent and two stucco chimneys. This is the west side of the house, and you can see one of the side porch in this picture, and also the landscape feature. So the south side of the facade of the house is the primary facade. Features a segmental arch, open porch, and the second-story projection, which was originally an open porch. There is a set of concrete stairs to the down of the hill, connecting to the oval-shaped truss. From this early photo from 1960s, it became clear that some decorative concrete panels some decorative concrete panels which can be seen in different location of the site like this are part of the original balustrade of the stairs. The date of removal of this concrete balustrade is unknown, unfortunately. And there are some original light fixtures are located at the outdoor area. Originally, they were 250 electric light in this estate. And this is the clock tower. The four-story clock tower was added to the property in 1914. The style of the clock tower is the same as the house, and originally it was built to be a garage for the house in its base level. And the tower, the clock tower, has several non-original sliding metal windows and door, which should be replaced with appropriate windows. And the new flat roof detached 5-car garage was added to the property in 1998. And this slide shows some of the remaining parts of landscape feature from the house, landscape of the house. So in overall, 1605 Arbor Drive is intact for its age and retains a high degree of integrity, and staff concludes that the property appears to meet criteria 1, 2, 3, and 5 for listing on Glendale Register of Historic Resources. And for the clock tower, which is already on the Glendale Register of Historic Resources as a GR number 26, if the House nomination approves, the clock tower will still have its original listing number, but will be considered in a new Mills Act contract as a part of the House. For eligibility criteria, as I mentioned, the House meets 4 criteria out of 5. To meet criteria 1, staff believes that 1605 Arbor Drive was identified as an important event in the development and growth of the area and had significant contribution to the broad cultural, political, economic, social, and historic heritage of the nation, state, and city. For criteria 2, the applicants and staff suggest that the property is associated with an important figure, John Breckman. And for criteria 3, the building itself exemplary express a high-skilled design, and also the house is one of the finest example of country houses, remains in the city. And for criteria 5, Breckman House is one of the first state properties built in Glendale and reflects early heritage of the city. And if staff recommends that if the Commission approves the nomination, this item consider as a Mills Act conditions, which is replacement of the sliding glass door and windows at the base of the clock tower, and removal of vinyl fence covering the equipment at the west side of the house, and also cleaning and refinish or paint of cast iron lamp post, and repair of some concrete details at the outdoor spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have a speaker?
Yes, bring up your card.
We'll open the public hearing.
Introduce yourself, please.
We welcome Chris Hoyer.
Hoyler.
Thank you.
How's everyone doing? Thank you very much for having me and this house on the ballot today. I'm the owner's assistant. The owner, unfortunately, had some business affairs that were prior engagements, and he couldn't attend today, so I'm attending on his behalf. thank everyone for coming out yesterday and seeing the property, those who did. It's a really amazing property. I've been his assistant now for about a year and a half, and I go over there pretty much every day and have something, going on. So it's a constant, maintaining, and they really do an extraordinary job at not only maintaining the house, but retaining the historical accuracy and the importance of the house. Just an example, the statue of Mercury, which was in the that center driveway, they have obtained the original statue, and I am currently in the process of actually having that restored through a gentleman in Culver City. And there are, that's the statue right there. And the concrete bases that were going down the stairs in the front of the property that they mentioned that they had fallen off at a time where they didn't know. The concrete base right there to the bottom left. Those actually fell off in an earthquake, and the owner wants to put the statue on one of those bases to kind of preserve everything and kind of tie the whole property together. So that's just an example of, how dedicated the owners really are to the property and retaining the historical value of everything. Obviously, they thank everyone very much for their time and consideration, and, if there are any questions, feel free to ask, and I'd be happy to help. Thank you.
Stay there for a second. Are there any questions at all? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll close the public session. Comments from commissioners or questions of staff?
Well, I have a question. So if we approve the house, then the clock tower is kind of grandfathered in?
No, it's already a historic.
I know it's already as GR 26, but
It would be
it
grandfathered
becomes
in under the Mills Act.
Yeah, it'll have the Mills Act will apply to the clock tower. It'll apply to the entire parcel. Yeah.
So there are going to be two landmarks on that property.
It'll be
then.
unusual, but it seems I don't really see a point in having a gap in our numbering system and just kind of moving the clock tower. It kind of reflects the history of how that happened, which itself is a little unusual. But.
and the things that were listed, but the clock itself, we have nothing over because it doesn't work.
It could work. The mechanism's all up there, and I believe it's the owner's intention to have that restored.
But that wouldn't be one of the conditions for the.
At this point, we could. Yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely a possibility. Yeah.
Oh, you're
I'm
saying
not
because
sure. I'm not
it's
sure that the owners.
zone.
GR, yeah.
Yeah, but if it's covered under the Mills Act, then yes, we should
Yeah,
have some domain
we can't.
over.
We can't put conditions on previously designated properties, but with the Mills Act, we can.
And it originally it didn't have the Mills Act. It just was the
No,
clock
never
tower.
had the Mills
Okay.
Act. Yeah. So it was a very strange designation because it applied only to the footprint of the building and not to the land around it.
So it's like when you do something to your house and suddenly your whole house is vulnerable to reassessment for permit issues. We can now apply Mills Act concerns to the clock tower.
Yeah, for either
Even though it's going to
conditions.
retain.
GR 20.
Yeah, it'll still have its Glendale Register listing. It'll basically have two listings. It's listed
See.
previously, and then now it's part of the bigger listing. And then the Mills Act will apply to it in the future, regardless of whatever conditions the Commission puts on today. Future changes will be under the guidance of the Mills Act requirements.
Any comments, thoughts?
Yeah, I visited the site yesterday. It was an amazing property as far as the way it lays out on that hill. I think it's an example, a great example as to how to develop on the hillside. And the way they used, it's all stepped up. It's not all one flat area and has different elevations, and that gives a better character to the property. And I think the owners not just are preserving the outside, and I was fortunate enough to talk to the gentleman, and he was gracious enough to let me into his house as well. And they've done a marvelous job in restoring the inside of the house to the original condition. All the wood beams, the floors, everything is done. I'm a developer. I've been in construction business for a long time. I couldn't find anything to just point my finger at. So it was a great job. It's a beautiful house. I'll be all for it wholeheartedly. And I think the retaining wall, the items those bricks or that concrete blocks that they had on the retaining walls, it's all over the property. I think it's his intention to collect them all, and some of them were in the pond. And I think it's his intention to collect them all and make something out of it, maybe a patio or as they indicated, to use it for the statue. Again, this is a great property. I think this is a good example of having 4 criteria out of 5 to meet the guidelines. It's an amazing situation, I think, and I congratulate them. So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay. Yes, this is certainly a grand and highly significant house in Glendale, and will make, I know that there's a historic district application for Brockmont Park in progress, and this is obviously a significant anchor for that designate historic district. Are we at the point of discussing add-ons to the Mills Act or comments on the Mills Act requirements at this point?
Keep notes on all of the things mentioned.
I noticed that in I believe the south-facing front elevation where there's the veranda with the globe lamps, and they had a lot of furniture on the patio, there were a number of bases that were missing their globes, and I think that the globes should be replaced so that all the bases look consistent. I don't know if there's a picture of that veranda, but it's the one that's fairly formal and has the fully fleshed out furniture, the sofas and the chairs on it.
The lowest elevation.
It's the lowest elevation terraced area.
Upper left photo, you can see.
And those concrete sculpted bases that have the globe lamps, there are several bases that don't have lamps on them, so that should be replaced. And I'd like to make the replacement or reestablishment of the Mercury statue as a decorative element of Mills Act. I'd like to recommend that. I don't know if everybody agrees, but I'd like that to go in. And on the clock tower, you mentioned the base windows and the sliding door, which clearly need to be replaced. What about the higher windows? Those are new also.
Yeah, those appear to be newer windows.
Should those be replaced also to look like the original clock tower?
Yeah, unless we find that I'm sorry, I just got a note. Well, we'll look at the early photos and make sure. I assume those had divided lights, which they don't now. If for some reason they didn't have divided lights, these would be pretty close to what was there, but we'll double check that.
I guess because there's such great documentation of the way it looked originally that whatever it is, the owner should replicate that.
Yeah, they look like hung windows.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look like double
So we could try to bring the windows of the tower back to the earlier appearance.
Yeah. And the only other thing was I know we all saw remnants of those concrete balustrade pieces, and I wasn't clear on what the intention was, just to reuse them or repurpose them in some way, because there are a lot of them. So
I think you had that as one of your conditions.
Is that one of your conditions?
No, we were only talking about repairing There's a lot of just concrete copings and pieces where we saw some damage. We weren't as bold as to say that the balustrade should be replaced. That's a possibility. I'm not sure if the owners have thought about that. So.
Or, just work those pieces, many of which looked like they were on the ground, but they were intact, could be used for something.
Yeah, I think it's fun just having them on the site.
Yeah.
And
okay. Maybe that doesn't need to be in the Mills Act.
Yeah,
I don't know. But the other two, I'd like to add the globes and the Mercury statue.
Yeah. Okay, and then let me just clarify as far as the sculpture goes. Should we try to find one of the early locations for it? There were 2 locations we've seen in photos, if I'm right, Eileen. There's one in front of the house, in front of the south patio, and then there's one in the motor court.
One here and one was here.
For the statue?
The here and here.
Here, in the front of the clock tower, and in front of the east side.
In front of the clock tower, that's right.
So he has to
Yeah, so the motor court probably isn't a practical place to put it, but we have a photo showing it kind of adjacent to the clock tower, which makes sense since they kind of came at the same time. So we can try to do that.
It's nice there, though.
I think it's just great that it'll go, they have found this statue and it'll be back on the property somewhere. I think the owner can, in my opinion, have leeway to where it best is suited.
Yeah, I would concur.
Okay, the best location.
Commissioner Vidor brought up a really good point about the globes, and are the ones that are there right now, they're not original, right? They were replaced? Because they look a little small compared to the base of those lampposts.
I think they were kind of funky looking from the beginning. They were round, so they're round globes, and they were noted in some of the early documentation. This place, evidently, the forest was lit with multicolored lights. The whole place was strung with electricity, so it must have been a real sight. But we could verify through the old photos about the relative proportion of the globes and make sure that
they're proportionately they're very small compared to the base of the.
Yeah, there are a few that are definitely not the right shape. There are a few that are kind of squat little globes that definitely are wrong. So we can try to.
Needs to be reworded to be like consistent and appropriate sized globes on each of the bases, rather than just whatever's there.
Yeah,
Sounds like whatever's
we'll make
there
a decision based on the historic
notice
photo
that.
and then find an appropriate size.
Look at them; they're really small.
Yeah, they are little. They were kind of cute.
Any comments?
Just in terms of the slider windows, if we could just say that later slider windows anywhere on the property, because there was also one on one of the upper decks facing the back hill.
On the north facade.
Right?
Yes, on the main
on
house.
the north facade, a smaller one.
Is that on the front or on that rear terrace?
Rear terrace. And then one of the conditions you were recommending was to repair concrete, and I noticed on the steps leading down the front of the house to that veranda we've been discussing, that were the original stairs to the front of the property, that on the risers there are significant cracks and plaster missing, just to ensure no further deterioration of those steps from water damage.
Yeah, some of that concrete appears to be original, so we'll try to preserve as much of that as possible. And then if sections have to be replaced, at least we know what the texture and the scoring pattern and all that would be like.
Right. And I think that's all I had. Again, I know the owner mentioned that he was looking for clock face replacements.
Right.
So
Yeah, it was cracked.
I don't know if it's fair to make that a condition or a
I think a
recommendation
consideration.
or a consideration.
Yeah.
Okay, and excuse me, what was?
The face of the clock tower, the alabaster, is cracked, and on some sides worse than others. But there was a comment about maybe replacing it altogether, and I think I would prefer it being repaired as best as it can.
Yeah, we've already
The
told
original
we've
state.
told the owner, who said it's his intention to repair those. He was talking about wholesale replacement, and I said that we would work with him really hard to find a way to hopefully preserve them and keep them going as long as we can.
Right.
So would that be a consideration, though, to work with the owner as when they come to us to replace the glass or to fix the glass?
Consideration, I'm sorry, just to clarify.
Yeah, a consideration isn't a
Repair.
requirement, so
No,
it
no.
wouldn't follow. I'm sorry, it wouldn't follow the timeline. This is DRB talk. So.
No, I understand that. I just wanted to make sure that I understood what we were considering. Repair as opposed to replacement, is that what we're...
Yeah, regardless of
Consideration.
whether it's a condition or just something that they come to us in the future to do, our first choice would be to repair and do everything we could to find a way for that to happen. And then if it didn't happen or hurricane hits and blows out, then we'll replace it. So.
Sounds fair.
My question is, part of Mills Act, are we asking them to get the clock in operating condition, or
That was
make it
discussed.
work?
We haven't heard a
So
final.
If that's the case, they have to repair the face of that clock, because otherwise it would.
Yeah, it's
I
pretty
don't know if
fragile
it would
looking.
work or
yeah.
not. So
Can I ask a question about the clock? When the clock was functioning originally, was it a chiming clock?
It evidently was a chiming clock. I don't think we should condition that for the sake of the neighborhood.
We wouldn't want it to chime.
But it was illuminated from inside, so that's definitely a possibility.
Illuminated would be
That would be
Okay.
nice.
reasonable.
Well,
So we're calling this a condition to repair the clock glass as well as bring the mechanism back to operation?
Condition?
Or
I think with deference to environmental impact, I mean, you know, if the clock is a noisy clock or a very bright clock face, then I have to consider that, I mean, he's like right on top of a bunch of other houses now because of all the subdivisions, so it isn't like when it was a grand estate.
we don't want to make them have to do an EIR because of the clock. So.
I didn't mean real environmental impact.
Right,
I
no,
meant just, you know, too bright, too loud, whatever.
And I think giving the owner appropriate time, as you typically do in the work plans, to have a few years, for these items,
Okay.
as not knowing the expense of replacing or repairing the clock. I'd just like to say thank you again to you and to the owners. If you could please pass this along, that we're thrilled to have this opportunity to protect this amazing home. And this is definitely one of those landmark properties in Glendale. And this is kind of what we have to weigh all homes kind of, against, or properties. And so this is just unbelievable with the history and how many criterion it meets, the domed turrets, like the diagonal wings kind of expanding out from the house, the clock tower, the views, the terrace, the concrete work, just phenomenal. And the owner has done an amazing job restoring every detail so far, and I can see they're on a good path, so we feel comfortable with the Mills Act and these few conditions that they're probably already on their way to doing some of these anyway. But please thank them for us, and it's an honor to.
And what we could do, because the owners aren't present, usually we ask for consent for agreement with the conditions, and we often work out a time frame with the owner. We should develop a time frame that we will present to the owner, and then if they have any problem with that, we would bring them back to the commission at a future hearing. But if they're okay with it, we'll be able to bring them to the city council hearing on December 10th for the final determination. So we'll just make sure that whatever time frame you determine is appropriate.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I could also throw out the idea that the contract's pretty much ours to do with what we want. So if you wanted to have a shorter time frame for some of the work and a longer time frame for something like the clock, perhaps, we could have different dates for those things.
I think they've done a lot of work in the last 2 years, and they still have a lot of work to do on the outside. It's a large property, and it's not easy to get it done. And here's a busy gentleman as well. I spoke to him I think we need to give him enough time to.
And for our larger projects, we've often recommended a 2-year time frame, and then maybe that for the clock or anything else that you think would be appropriate, we could extend that to a 3 or 4 year for the second piece.
That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, 2 years and 4 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let me read back the conditions just so everyone can make sure we've got everything you discussed. In terms of the staff conditions, we'll replace the first staff condition with replacement of all inappropriate windows with new windows, wood windows, to match whatever evidence we have from either existing sash or from photographs of the tower. The commission didn't mention, and I don't think this is a major issue, we thought the little vinyl fence that was over near the pond that was hiding some equipment kind of looked like a vinyl fence, and maybe we could do something better there. The cast iron lampposts should be cleaned and then refinished or painted, whatever is an appropriate treatment. Concrete details at the outdoor areas will be repaired where necessary, and we can work with the applicants to identify those locations in the field. Going back to the light fixtures, we'll get consistently sized globes based on the historic evidence in the photos, and so any missing or inappropriate globes will be replaced. The statue of Mercury, and this is something we might also, if they're already having it repaired, maybe it will be ready in 2 years. We'll reinstate the sculpture either at the clock tower location that we know it once stood at or at some other appropriate location. windows. We'll include in our look at the concrete, the front steps, where Commissioner Vartani noticed some cracking. And then, so those would all be our 2-year window. So by 2015, December 31st, 2015, those would be repaired. And then by 2017, the clock glass and the mechanism will be restored. Hopefully the clock glass will be repaired rather than replaced, and the mechanism will operate again, and the interior illumination will be brought back at an appropriate brightness. And that's everything that I got.
Okay, great. Is there a motion?
I'll go ahead with that if you need somebody.
No. Second?
Oh, hang on. Just got to read it first.
Sorry. Oh, yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Read the motion.
What's the motion? Okay, I move that the Historic Preservation Commission recommends that City Council designate the property at 1605 Arbor Drive as a historic resource to be known as Brockmont. Add the property to the Glendale Register of Historic Resources, and authorize the city manager to enter into a Mills Act contract for the property. And the commission finds that the proposed resource meets criterias 1, 2, 3, and 5. And this recommendation is made with considerations as defined for Mills Act corrections.
Conditions as noted by staff.
As noted by staff. Okay. Oh, yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Garpetian?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Chair Shire?
Yes.
Thank you. Voted 5-0.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, next on the agenda is 7C, 630 West Kenneth Road. This is a Glendale Register nomination and a Mills Act application. Staff report.
Good afternoon, members of the Commission. Today I will present to you a Glendale Register nomination for the property located at 630 West Kenneth Road. 630 West Kenneth Road is a single-family residence built approximately the year 1890. This estimate comes from an LA County Assessor's record dated 1920. So while we aren't clear on the exact build year, we do know that it was already considered an old house at that time of that record. No architect is known. In fact, that 1920 record is the first official record we have of any sort on this property. We classified today as a colonial revival style house, although that may not always have been the case. I'll talk a little bit about its stylistic evolution later on in the report. So the property is located in the Glenwood neighborhood of the city. Kenneth Road was one of the oldest country roads in this area, and it's home to some other grand colonial revival style residences like the Jones House and Colonial View, both already designated on the Glendale Register. At the time the house was built, the street was known as Bow Road. So it's difficult to know exactly what the house's original appearance was due to the lack of early records, but we do believe the original massing remains unchanged. It's rectangular in plan with a hipped roof. Cladding is wood clapboard throughout the house, and fenestration patterns are symmetrical. Massing is largely unchanged. So this shows the evolution of the massing over time. 1922, which is the first record we have, and then in 1935, and then now in 2007. So no information about 630 West Kenneth Road's original owners is known. The first written record of any kind, now earlier I said official record, we do have some evidence that one of the early owners was a saloon keeper named Jack Kipper. So he was mentioned pretty frequently in the local papers, and in 1912 he and his family retired to this property It was considered out in the country at the time. So we were able to uncover some interesting information about Jack Kipper. He's not considered a significant person in the history of the city or the region, but nonetheless, I thought, it might be fun to include some information about him. So he was the business partner and manager and sort of official mouthpiece of the heavyweight boxing champion Jim Jeffries. The two owned what they called a gentleman's cafe or a beer hall over on Spring Street downtown. Kipper made the news in 1905 when he was sued by a black patron for basically refusing to serve him. The guy was allowed to come into the saloon, but Kipper wanted to charge him $2 for a beer that cost 5 cents, and so that made the news, and the judge ruled in favor of Kipper. So this shows a little bit about just the casual, normalized racism of 19th century, early 20th century Los Angeles. I have one more Kipper Jeffries anecdote on the topic of racism. So by all accounts, Jim Jeffries was, he was a good guy, a stand-up fellow. But today he's best remembered for a 1910 match against the African-American boxer Jack Johnson. So by then he had retired. He was really out of shape. He had retired to an alfalfa ranch over in Burbank. But promoters kind of made him this offer that he couldn't refuse, and he was billed the Great White Hope. So the writer Jack London actually even weighed in on the match, saying Jeffries needed to emerge from his alfalfa ranch and knock the grin off Jack Johnson's face, or something to that effect. So Jeffries worked out furiously. He lost over 100 pounds, but he was KO'd in what many said was the most one-sided match in history. So, it's sad for Jeffries, but sort of poetic justice. So back to the house. There you go. 630 West Kenneth Road features a double porch at both the front and rear facades. The square columns you see today at the front were round previously and then boxed in the 1940s to their current appearance. The lower porch has a concrete floor that is probably not original. The entry door is extra wide with rectangular side lights and a transom above. Though it appears old, we know that it was replaced in the 1920s, and based on permits, we think they may have been narrow double doors. The upper porch features a low wood balustrade. Most windows are double hung with decorative wood shutters. They appear to be either original or appropriate later replacements. Both the east and west elevations feature a large bay window, one of which appears to have been an early addition. The rear porches, which had been enclosed in the 1940s and 50s, were reconstructed in 2007 by the current owner to match the front porches. At the same time, the current owners extended the main body of the house maybe by about 5 feet. The main roof was extended to cover the addition with a secondary hip projecting above the upper porch. Here's some more views of that rear addition. The new work is of excellent quality. They did such a good job. It's really difficult to tell where the original siding ends and where the new work begins. It's just really well integrated. A few new windows appropriate to the style of the house were added at either elevation. These are the new windows here. Just a couple other changes. The chimney was reconstructed in the 1920s. We're thinking, based on the build year, that the chimney was probably brick clad at some point. Now it's clapboard cladding to match the rest of the house. The garage at the rear of the property is 2 stories and clad with cementitious siding to resemble wood clapboard. It was originally a barn, but converted into a garage by 1920. It was altered in 2010, which changed the roof pitch as well as the garage door openings. The wash house turned storage shed located at the side of the property is pre-1920, and we're thinking that it may be original based on the hardware and some of the other details. So in all likelihood, the house looks a bit different today than it did when it was built in 1890. We can't be sure, but based on what we know about this area in the late 19th century, it was like rural fields 2 miles outside of town. And so it's pretty unlikely that a high-style colonial revival house would have been built then there. Some of the clues that we have are permits indicating an unspecified redecoration in the 1920s, and that involved the removal of an interior bearing wall and addition of a staircase and steel I-beam. In 1922, the county assessor described the interior as plain, which, as you saw from your site visit, is certainly not the case today. So, commissioners, you be the judge, but we found that while the interior detailing is of high quality, it looks to be a little bit awkwardly proportioned, maybe a little bit oversized. That was what staff felt. So it's not unfeasible that the exterior was redone to match the interior changes in the 1920s or sometime thereabouts. So some of these uncertainties aside, 630 West Kenneth is a rare survivor of early Glendale. Even if the 1890 estimate is off by a few years, it's still likely to be one of the oldest standing houses in the city. And staff strongly recommends approval for its nomination based on 2 criteria. The first is criterion 3. The house is remarkably well maintained and intact. Taking into consideration some of the stylistic changes, the general massing is mostly unchanged, and it retains many of the colonial revival features. And compared with other colonial revival styles in Glendale, its massing is more farmhouse. It's simple and boxy, which gives us some indication that this was probably a vernacular style farmhouse when it was originally built. So a little bit about the addition at the rear. It can really be said that the addition brings the house back closer to its original appearance and original design intent than what it was prior to that 2007 change. And we believe pretty strongly that the new work meets the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation.
Most stuff.
Most stuff. And we felt that it tells sort of a unique story of residential development in Glendale. When it was built in 1890, really what would have been out there was a ranch or a farmhouse, something like that. And then as the city developed into the 1920s, the booming population and sort of that influx of a middle class probably demanded some updates, both to the back, the garage, as well as the appearance from the street. And in terms of criterion 5, it's really remarkable when you think that the original owners of the property were neighbors of the Verdugo family. The Verdugos still lived on their original land grant property at this time. And really, we have very few pre-1900 structures still standing, not only in this part of the city, but just all over Glendale. And so really, we felt that it gets sort of a head start in thinking about this particular criterion. By the way, if the house is designated, because we don't know of the original owner's name and we couldn't find any owner that would make it rise to a particular level of significance, we would just recommend it being called 630 West Kenneth Road. Some of the recommended Mills Act conditions for the property, first would be to provide a termite report and perform any necessary mitigation. Second would be to repair all damaged or deteriorated exterior wood You probably saw that there was some significant deterioration, especially at the rear of the property. And just an all-over paint job would be recommended as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We have no speaker cards for this property either, so we'll go on to commissions.
Representing the owner? Yeah. Okay, just fill out a card when you're done if you want to talk to it.
Okay, come forward. We do have somebody.
Yeah, the owner's not here today, but I prepared
Your
the
name,
nomination report.
Your name,
Juliet Arroyo.
Thanks.
I prepared the nomination report, and it took over a year to do this, mostly because I was determined to find evidence. Who built that house? When, where, how, why, what? I mean, I really needed to know that to tell the full story, because this house, I think, tells an excellent story of Northwest Glendale. And that story would be more clear if we knew the original owner, the date and time. So at this point, I can only speculate. 1890 is our evidence from 1920. I might guess it could be a little bit older than that, but only a little bit. It could be in the 1880s because that was the boom. And prior to that, this was part of the Hunter subdivision, and the Hunter subdivision was a huge land speculation zone that took up a lot of Northwest Glendale, which in this area around Hoover High School was where a portion of the Verdugo family lived, and they populated it. There were over 10 adobes at one time in this Northwest Glendale area. So this property, although it says 1890, I think its heritage goes a little bit back when you think about the Hunter subdivision and the Verdugo land grant and Anglo-American settlement. And this house could easily have been in Burbank today, but because Burbank and Glendale had the same development history, and they were expanding, so this could be in Burbank today, but history didn't make that happen. Glendale actually annexed this territory. So I think it tells a great story of this early Glendale heritage here, which this was actually the county at the time, of course, and Kenneth Road was actually called County Road. Just not even a number, just County Road. And before it was part of LA County, it was probably just a dirt path. So it's not just the neighborhood, it's Kenneth Road in Northwest Glendale. And I suspect, it could be in the late 1880s. And just as the staff mentioned, I actually also suspect that it could have been a tiny little house at one time. And I think it's actually I would call it a settlement house. Because I think the house, the original owner owned a huge, probably a couple of lots in the Hunter subdivision. So this ranch house, this settlement house, this farmhouse, the territory around it was probably really large, and it got smaller over time. So I suspect that, like the staff said, that it was a much smaller house. Even probably starting in the 1880s, development on this ranch probably started, and it just got bigger and bigger over time, especially in the 1920s when Jack Kipper acquired the property and he made significant changes to the house. And this is just a side note about Jack Kipper. He was the co-owner of the Jeffries Saloon. And there's a Jeffries downtown, still a Jeffries off of Main. I don't know if it's the same Jeffries, but it could be. I didn't go that much into the history. But it could have been the Jeffries could have moved. And so I'm happy to kind of highlight the history of this house, which most people don't know when they're driving by. They see a grand colonial home, or a southern plantation style home along Kenneth Road. And now with more information about this home, I think Northwest Glendale can be proud of this as part of their heritage.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
I have one question. Just
your microphone.
Do I repeat myself? Okay.
Yeah.
Start over.
Yeah.
Juliet, let him repeat his comment.
Sorry, I was talking to Mr. Moses yesterday, and I asked him about the conditions of the Mills Act. If he's aware of it, he said he doesn't know anything about it. So my suggestion is to let him know there are conditions to Mills Act contracts, so he would know what he's facing. It's not much, compared to if you buy a new house, you have to do the same thing.
And that was an oversight on our part. But we have the room. Well, we'll definitely get in touch with him this week and let him know.
Okay.
And just like with the other house, if the owner has an issue with any of the conditions, we can hold this over, or we can bring it back for consideration. Otherwise, we'll just take it to council if he's okay with them.
Okay, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I met with the owner early on, of course, and I explained to him about the Mills Act program. And there are, maybe you've noticed it in some of the photos, there is some deterioration. There's a lot of wood surfaces in this house. There is some deterioration of wood and paint. So, we talked about that, the work plan over the next several years and the priority about actually stabilizing the structure, making sure it's going to last another 100 years because, the weathering and the wearing is taking a toll on the house. So,
Thank you.
And then to clarify one thing, or do you have a question for Julie?
No, I don't have a question. Go ahead. I just wanted to thank you for your exceptional report, and you just mentioned that it took you about a year to put it together, and it really shows.
This commission reads every page.
We
do.
Yeah, no.
There was a lot in that report.
yeah, the sad part was, and part of why it took a year, was the county's records. It's really sad. You probably know, Mike. When you go before 1901, the records are okay up until 1901, but the county's assessment records and the deeds and all those records, I think a lot of them, I don't know, half have been lost or stolen or just lost. So, we know that the county did assess this property. Of course, they were collecting taxes on it. So there had to have been some type of assessment record, but it's just been lost. So that we can't prove when this house was built or who built it. But we know it was, the county would have captured it. I don't think they would have missed this one. So, especially because it was probably a large land tract, so they were going to tax the property. So,
Okay, thank you.
Side note.
Thank you.
And then just one point of clarification. In the staff report, we didn't speculate that the house was originally smaller.
No.
And Ms. Arroyo might be right about that, but I kind of accept the idea that there were grandly scaled homes being built in rural areas throughout the region. Yeah. One of the issues is the colonial revival style was kind of new in America in the 1880s, and styles didn't reach the West Coast all that quickly. And since we have reason to speculate that there were colonial revival changes in the 1920s, we thought maybe that could be when shutters and perhaps windows were changed. But the overall form of the house we're kind of accepting as very likely original, with the double porches. But it's to some degree speculation unless we start tearing it down and seeing what's inside. So let's try not to do that.
Bad.
Comments by commissioners?
Okay. I certainly was charmed by the age of the house and its significance as an early home in that area. The shiplap siding, and I peeked into the inside. I didn't really take a tour of it, but there are certain things about it that reminded me of Art Devine, which is a grand, often called settlement house or semi-farmhouse style, eclectic architecture that dates from 1903, I think, either 1903 or 1906. And it seemed, if we're going to speculate, that maybe Nathaniel Dryden was inspired by this house, if in fact the siding is original, which it appears to be, because it's exactly the same siding, and it has that hybridized farmhouse, grand house combination that Ardevine has. So I noted the similarity between the two in some respects, although this is a much different shape house. I like the way the owner, obviously that was a very expensive project, but bringing back the rear porches and at the same time giving themselves more space because they added on square footage, but they brought the look of the house back to a more historical look in a very nice, thoughtful way. He also mentioned that he did a lot of work on the foundation. I guess there was some collapsing going on at the base of the house. And he talked to me about that, so maybe ask him about that. He talked about that a lot, actually, and what a project the house was, like a lot, yes. So obviously it was something that took up a lot of time. I wonder, are the columns underneath those square columns, the round columns?
The way the permit's written, it says that the round columns were boxed.
Oh.
So that makes me think that they're there. They're the structural support, and then the square.
Yeah. Okay, is that something we want to look at, or is it, I think square columns on a simple house like that is appropriate, but I would throw it out for consideration. Is that something we would want to look at as a consideration? Other than that, and the things that you brought up on your suggestions, I couldn't find anything else. I was a little perplexed by the large grasscrete configuration in the back, but it sounded like it was a vast improvement over what was there before, which apparently was solid concrete. So, there's no historic landscape back there that we have to worry about, correct? So that's
no, but the commission, it's in your purview to recommend a more appropriate landscape if you thought this wasn't appropriate.
Well, he talked about his children biking, and we talked about decomposed granite as a more countrified, appropriate type of driveway, and that would be very dangerous for the kids. And I'm a little torn as to what to mandate on that. It doesn't seem quite in keeping with the house, but I don't know what the solution would be. So,
the one thing we wouldn't have any known historic basis for this property.
Exactly.
We could only go back to something that might be appropriate.
Right.
There wouldn't have been a paved driveway in 1890.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think, I don't know what the answer to that would be, and it seemed like this was a proper solution for them. But I think it's admirable what was done with the back to bring it back to the open porch and keep the necessary square footage. That's about it for me.
Anyone else?
Oh, no, well, I was just going to say that this is another one of those properties that we're very fortunate to have brought forth. It's such an important part of the city's architectural history and perhaps its economic history as well. To speak to the columns that may be hiding under the boxed additions at the front, my only immediate thought is that the change in the columns is early, right?
1941? Yeah, early 1940s.
40s?
So
okay.
not early.
And so if we want to think about that, then maybe we should also think about the changes that were recently made to the back to bring it in conformity with the front, and then we'll have, square columns at the back and round columns at the front. And that might just be something to think about. I think I don't have a strong opinion either way.
I don't either. I just was curious about it and whether, it was an issue we needed to discuss, but since the columns were an add-on anyway, I don't think it's relevant. Require that.
I have a comment right now.
I have a couple comments. One, I was very impressed with the age of the property, and I think coming before us as something in the late 1800s is pretty spectacular, and having it still intact and standing, and a great resource for Glendale as far as his history. I have some concerns, as always, right, on the exterior facade in the rear. Understanding changes happen over time, and I think the front with the square columns being boxed in over round doesn't really bother me because I think it fits the house and it does. But with the addition in the back, they didn't use square columns. They're much beefier, rectilinear. We've now lost the symmetry of windows and doors that you typically would have on this type of home. And with the porch not extending the entire way, which I think the owner mentioned was kind of a code issue or something. I don't know the details of that.
Tried to do it.
But it is a little concerning. I would have liked to see those columns match the front and be more proportionally appropriate. It's quite heavy, and I think the architecture style from the front is very, very streamlined and grand and vertical, and this is just it's not the best addition in my opinion. So I struggle with the age because I think for the age, if we just want to identify it under criterion, was it 5? To me, I can completely support that because of the age and the value of history for this property to the city. Architecturally, I think it loses something, and I don't know that I can say, especially with so much ambiguity over what it was and what it is and the changes in the years, if truly we want to recommend it for designation under the historic architecture. So I would support it more under criterion 5 than under 3.
I completely agree with Madam Chair. I think there were so many modifications done to this property, especially the barn was demolished, and the second story that was added to, they moved the stairs out. It was accessed from the inside before, and they moved the stairs out. And the porches that was added on to the rear of the property because of code issue or design issue at that time, they were not allowed to basically continue the porch on the second floor. I think I will support this project based on criteria 5 as well, because this is one of the oldest homes in Glendale, and we want to see it preserved. But architecturally, I don't think it has that significant design, and because I don't even know what kind of a style it is right now. If it started very small and it was added on to, and it was added on to, and it was added on to, it loses its basically fraction or its value, if you will, as far as architecture goes. But they've done a great job maintaining the house. For its age, it's a gorgeous house, and I think we need to talk to the owner because he was telling me about the foundation issues that he had. That I'm sure he's going to take care of it. I don't think he's going to let anything happen to the house. But as far as the barn and the garage goes, comparing to each other, what happened to it, even the sidings on the garage is not the same style as the house. So it didn't follow the same line of architectural style, if you will. But under criteria 5, I would support the project.
I have a question. Is the garage and the wash house are separate buildings? The garage was almost completely demolished, right, and rebuilt. So
yeah, it seems the
that's
form
not
of
even
it's almost there.
part
But
of it. Is that
well, it's part of the designated property. So all of our ideally all of our Glendale registered
It was completely
designations.
demolished because I was told it was because of termite
yeah.
issues.
and it's
or
not
whatever.
wood-sided either.
Oh, no. The garage definitely has huge problems of integrity. So, but it would still be part of the designation. If you designate it under criterion 5, where we're not as focused on the architecture, you might say, okay, we'll leave the garage alone. We'll focus on the main house just to make sure it's stabilized and stays intact. If they came to us in the future to make alterations to the garage, we might, since we have the historic photo of what it looked like, we might be able to bring it closer to that appearance. But that would only be, whenever the future owner decides to do that.
Do we have a photograph of the rear of the house before it was enclosed?
We do. No, not before it was enclosed, but you can see the original kind of porch system in that photo.
You can see the columns were thinner, narrower
Right.
from that.
Yeah.
Right there you go.
Yeah, so ideally that would have, assuming the addition had to be made, that would have been bumped forward, looking pretty much like it does without the enclosures.
The other thing I wanted to comment on is they had an extensive work plan listed in the Mills Act, which covered some of your issues, but yeah, there is definitely some concern on the wood, the peeling paint, the exposed wood on the main house for sure, and the little shed, which quite honestly has a little bit more romantic feel to one of the original structures. It looks like it definitely needs some help. The fascia on the roof siding has some beautiful like rosette detail. One, it looks like maybe there were more and they're missing, and it's cracked and almost falling off. And so I think we should really try to restore that, and because that's, you know, looking to be fairly original, left with hardware and building. I do agree with your condition recommendation, so if it moves forward. Any questions or motions?
Well, let's go back to the conditions and make. Oh,
sorry, Commissioner Morgan.
Well, I would just agree with Juliet Arroyo as far as the age. It probably was done when they had the original land boom, in about 1887. And I brought a picture of a contemporary building at the time. Yeah. This is the Glendale Hotel, which was built because of the land boom, and you have to look at it as being, even if it's 1890 or 1887, it's been around for a long, long time. And I do believe that Criteria 5 covers it completely, though, you know, I'm trying to think of another house like that in Glendale, if somebody could refresh my memory.
The Taylor House is one of, it's 1873, and when you look at it today, it does not reflect that age. It's been added on too many times. It has siding that you wouldn't have seen at the time. It's very consistent looking now. So it certainly doesn't look, this looks like an older property than the Taylor House does. But that's one of the first designations, so we can't really go back and say why it was designated. But certainly because of its age, I'm sure. And I can't remember, the Richardson House also is one of our earliest single-family houses, wood-framed houses. And that was moved to its existing location, but it still very much looks like a farmhouse, and was also significant. Richardson was, you know, hugely significant as a landowner and developer of Glendale, or early father of Glendale. So those are the two that come to mind as comparable.
Well, for me, the Criteria 3, I can see the chairwoman's concerns about this and the fact that it has been built on over the years, but we see a lot of homes that have been built on over the years. And as long as it's actually nominated for Criterion 5 would satisfy me. But something that has been around since 1890 is not going to be pristine, and the fact that it has been changed a little bit doesn't bother me as much as the fact that it's still here.
I would add that, you know, I think if I understood you correctly, Ms. Arroyo, that it's speculation that the house was smaller, and we don't have evidence to suggest that a house couldn't be large in the 1800s, because we have examples of some houses and buildings that were built in a grand style. So, you know, the fact that there's that add-on on the back, I mean, I can remember us allowing designation of a house because it was made of brick, just because it was made of brick, which, you know, I'm still pondering that one, but I think this house is made of shiplap siding, which is very unique. So I wouldn't necessarily want to discount number 3. I'm kind of split.
Well, we wouldn't, regardless of which criterion it's designated under, we will treat, under the Mills Act, we'll treat any repairs using the Secretary of the Interior standards. So the existing siding would be replaced in kind if it had to be replaced. All aspects of it are, we don't hold a separate standard, I guess. So.
Okay, so the lack of criteria 3 is not going to.
No, it'll be.
The conditions can remain. It's just to get it on the register, it doesn't have to be as pristine. I think it gives us a little bit more grace to the garage that's really not, you know, matching the house, the addition on the back facade, some of the major changes.
Yeah, this is a nice example of how Criterion 5 can come in handy, because I don't think anyone questions that this really reflects something special about the early heritage. But we're all kind of, I'm not sure, you know, I was uncomfortable. I think we were all uncomfortable not knowing exactly what happened, and Juliet obviously put a lot of effort into trying to find out, and it's just not out there, so.
So I would also support the nomination on criterion 5 then.
Do you want to read a motion?
Sure.
Okay, and then one thing, let's just make sure we have the conditions. We're going to ask for a termite report unless we have a report that's been done in the last 5 years. This is similar to the future, change that we'll make to the Mills Act for future property owners. All damaged or deteriorated exterior wood will be repaired. If that's not feasible, it will be replaced in limited amounts as possible with wood to match. And the entire house, including siding, trim, and all exposed structural members, as well as the wash house wood, and will be painted. So the wash house will be included as part of that condition. And then if we could get a time frame from the commissioners that you think would be appropriate for this. I would probably recommend 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
Kind of urgent.
Okay.
Okay, motion?
Okay, I move that the HPC recommend that City Council designate the property at 630 West Kenneth Road as a historic resource. Add the property to the Glendale Register of Historic Resources and authorize the city manager to enter into a Mills Act contract for the property pursuant to the conditions that were agreed upon by the commission. And that it be recommended under criterion 5 that the historic resource exemplifies the early heritage of the city. And that it be named 630 West Kenneth Road.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Garpetian?
Yes.
Chair Shire?
Yes.
Thank you. Voted passes 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Next on the agenda is 8, Planning Division updates and informational briefings. Do we have any?
We just have one brief one.
Okay.
Just about, we've talked a bunch about our calendar for the rest of the year. We were looking ahead and realized that our next meeting, based on not being able to stay on our usual schedule because of other commissions and boards meeting, we were going to move it to November 18th, which is just 3 weeks away. We really only have 3 items that we know we need to consider for the rest of the year, so we thought we would move that hearing till cancel the 11/18 hearing and continue with the special meeting that we have scheduled for December 16th at 5 o'clock. That's Monday, December 16th at 5. And that's all I've got.
Okay, with that, do we move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Meeting
Time
adjourned.
is 4:50.
Thank you.